Welcome to Infinite Universe with interesting episode. In 1974, something happened on the set of Blazing Saddles that almost nobody ever talks about. The actor who was originally cast to play the Waco Kid disappeared after only one day of shooting. What he did 4 years later would leave a dark shadow over Hollywood. Even stranger, when legendary actor John Wayne read the script, he said just 3 words that completely changed the direction of the film. The original title of Blazing Saddles had a connection to Malcolm X, but Warner Brothers erased that part from history. And hidden within the film is a strange little message in the name of the governor, a joke that only French historians would recognize. These aren't just pieces of movie trivia, they're deeply buried secrets that people have been trying to hide for more than 50 years. Blazing Saddles started off as a wild and risky idea. The movie was originally called Tex-Ex, which was a clear reference to Malcolm X. Andrew Bergman, the man who came up with the idea, was still in his 20s at the time. He wanted to tell a story about a black sheriff in an all-white western town. That idea alone was explosive back then. And naming the sheriff after Malcolm X wasn't meant to be funny, it was a powerful statement. Bergman wanted to tear apart the clean, whitewashed image of Hollywood cowboys. Having a black man take charge in the Old West flipped the entire Western genre on its head. Even more surprising was that a big movie studio actually took the script seriously. In the early 1970s, very few movies dealt with race in such a direct way, especially not comedies. The name Tex-Ex was eventually dropped, but that fiery energy stayed in the final version of Blazing Saddles. Before Mel Brooks came into the picture, the movie almost went in a completely different direction. Alan Arkin was originally set to direct, and the actor chosen to play the sheriff was James Earl Jones years before he would become famous as the voice of Darth Vader. Jones had a powerful presence and deep voice, but he didn't have a background in comedy. Still, he was a strong and respected choice. But the project started falling apart. There were creative arguments, nervous studio executives, and fears that the script was just too dangerous. It was too bold, too sharp, and made too many people uncomfortable. So the project was shelved. When Mel Brooks came on board, everything changed. He didn't tone it down, he turned it up. Without that earlier failure, Blazing Saddles as we know it never would have existed. At the time, Brooks wasn't doing well in his career. His film The Producers had won an Oscar, but it hadn't made much money. His next film, The 12 Chairs, had been a complete failure. He was broke, couldn't afford a new car, and had a baby on the way with his wife and Bancroft. He was so discouraged that he was ready to quit movies and go back to working in television. Then he was offered the script for Tex-Ex. He didn't take the job because he believed in himself, he took it because he was desperate. Later, Brooks admitted that this movie saved his life. It allowed him to buy a house, pay the bills, eat a good dinner, and finally breathe again. Blazing Saddles completely turned his life around. Writing the script was total madness. Brooks didn't do it alone. He brought in 4 other writers, Andrew Bergman, Richard Pryor, Norman Steinberg, and Alan Yuga. The writing sessions were like an all-out brawl. Everyone was yelling, arguing, and fighting to keep their jokes in the script. They worked long into the night, living off Chinese takeout and pure adrenaline. The first draft of the script was 412 pages long, that's enough material for almost 8 hours of film. They cut it down to 275 pages, which was still way too long, but it was full of wild, rebellious humor. Richard Pryor added a sharp edge to the writing, especially when it came to shaping the voice of the characters. The fart scene around the campfire, that famous, shocking moment, came out of this chaotic writing process. This wasn't a calm, careful writing job. It was war. But what came out of it was something Hollywood had never seen before. From the very beginning, Brooks made it clear what kind of movie he wanted to make. He even put a sign on the wall that said, "Please do not write a polite script." That one sentence set the tone for the entire project. He told his team to ignore the rules and go wild. His logic was simple. The studio probably wouldn't let them make the movie anyway, so they had nothing to lose. They attacked racism, mocked Hollywood cliches, and joked about topics nobody else would dare touch. Richard Pryor wrote Jewish jokes, and the Jewish writers wrote black jokes. Nobody stayed in their lane, and the mix of voices gave the movie its fearless and unforgettable tone. It didn't just make fun of westerns, it tore them apart and built something completely new. Originally, Richard Pryor was supposed to play Sheriff Bart. He was Brooks's top choice. But Warner Brothers refused. They said Pryor's drug problems and his time in jail made him impossible to insure. Brooks was furious. He thought about quitting the whole project. But surprisingly, Pryor remained calm and told Brooks not to give up. He said, "We'll find the right guy. Keep going." Pryor stayed on the writing team and helped shape the film's tone from behind the scenes. Eventually, the role of Bart went to Cleavon Little. Brooks later said they got lucky with Little. But it's hard not to wonder what the film might have been like if Pryor had played the lead, especially since he and Gene Wilder became one of the most beloved comedy duos in history just 2 years later. The biggest casting twist came when Mel Brooks asked John Wayne to play the Waco Kid. Yes, that John Wayne, the ultimate serious cowboy. Brooks gave him the script, and Wayne read it overnight. He told Brooks he laughed his ass off, but he had to turn it down. He said it was too dirty for his image. Still, he promised he'd be first in line to watch it. Just imagine it, the straightest cowboy of all time playing a washed-up drunk in a movie that made fun of every Western trope. It didn't happen, but it almost did. After Wayne said no, Brooks became obsessed with casting Dan Dailey. Dailey wasn't known for westerns, he was a musical star, but he could ride a horse better than almost anyone. Brooks thought he was perfect. He even tracked him down in Hawaii. Dailey loved the script but turned it down, saying his eyesight was failing and he couldn't ride safely anymore. Brooks was devastated. Then came the worst casting disaster of all. Brooks hired Gig Young, a talented actor who had won an Oscar. He had the right weary look for the Waco Kid. But on the first day of shooting, during a jail cell scene, Young started shaking violently. Brooks thought it was part of the performance until green bile came out of Young's mouth. He was rushed to the hospital. Brooks later said, "If you want an alcoholic, don't cast an alcoholic." Young never came back and later sued Warner Brothers. The film had lost its Waco Kid again. That's when Gene Wilder came in. Brooks hadn't even considered Wilder for the role. He thought he was too young and too fresh-faced. He had offered Wilder a villain role earlier, but Wilder turned it down. Now desperate, Brooks called him in tears. Wilder had just finished working with Brooks on The Producers. He got on a plane and flew straight to Los Angeles. When he tried on the costume for the Waco Kid, it fit perfectly. That Monday, he was already on set. His quiet charm and unusual timing turned the character into something unforgettable. And his chemistry with Cleavon Little became the emotional heart of the movie. Out of all the chaos, that last-minute casting decision saved the entire film. When Brooks showed the first screening of Blazing Saddles to the top Warner Brothers executives, it was a complete disaster. The room was silent. Not one executive laughed. The movie had fart jokes, a scene where a man punches a horse, and characters using the N-word without hesitation. Instead of laughter, there was discomfort, then anger. The studio's head of domestic distribution, Leo Greenfield, said they should bury the film and take the financial loss. Others agreed. They didn't just dislike the movie, they wanted it erased. They gave Brooks a long list of scenes to cut, remove the campfire, take out the racial slurs, and delete the violence. Brooks took the list, walked out of the room, and crumpled it into a ball. He wasn't cutting anything. Brooks knew he had one last chance. He arranged a second screening not for the executives, but for the regular workers at Warner Brothers. He invited secretaries, janitors, mailroom staff, and anyone who worked behind the scenes. And this time, the response was electric. From the very first joke, people were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Some even fell out of their chairs. Norman Steinberg, one of the co-writers, said people were literally rolling on the floor laughing. Brooks turned to him and said, "This is our film." That night, the executives saw something they couldn't ignore. Real people, normal audiences, loved it. And that's what saved the film from being shut down completely. Even after that wild reaction, the studio was still scared. They didn't want to release the film nationwide. So they played it safe. Blazing Saddles would open in just 3 cities, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. No big advertising. No critic previews. No media buzz. Just cold releases to test the waters. These cities were chosen because they were more likely to understand Mel Brooks's kind of humor, especially the Jewish Catskill-style comedy he was famous for. The studio hoped for modest box office numbers, just enough to avoid embarrassment. What they got was something else entirely. Theaters were packed. Audiences were roaring with laughter. Word of mouth spread fast. The movie became a wildfire. Critics were confused, some loved it, some called it offensive, but audiences kept coming. By the spring of 1974, the movie was playing in small towns and suburbs, selling out everywhere. People didn't just watch Blazing Saddles. They memorized it, quoted it, argued about it, and came back to see it again. Even the critics who hated the film had to admit that the crowds were going wild. Blazing Saddles had broken every rule and smashed through every barrier. Then came the money. The film was made on a small budget of just $2.6 million. But by the time it finished its theatrical run, it had earned over $119 million in North America alone. That made it the #1 movie of 1974. An estimated 63 million people saw it in theaters, more than any Lord of the Rings movie decades later. When adjusted for inflation, it made nearly $600 million. It wasn't just a success. It was a cultural explosion. Mel Brooks had followed his gut, ignored the executives, and made exactly the movie he believed in, and it paid off. Blazing Saddles didn't just survive. It changed the rules of comedy forever. Even the tiniest details of the movie had deep meanings. For example, the governor's name was William J. Lepetamine. At first, it sounds like a bunch of nonsense. But it was actually a reference to a real French performer named Joseph Pujol. He was born in 1857 and became famous under the stage name Lepetamine, which means the fart maniac. That wasn't just a nickname, it was his entire act. He could inhale air or water into his rectum and release it on cue. He played music, blew out candles, did impressions, and could even smoke a cigarette using only his backside. He was so popular that nurses had to be present at his shows to help people who fainted from laughing too hard. One person allegedly even died from laughing. Pujol was so successful that he earned more money than the most famous actresses in France. And that's the hidden genius of Blazing Saddles. Behind the absurdity, behind the chaos, was careful thought, bold storytelling, and the bravery to say things no one else would. It wasn't just a movie. It was a revolution in disguise. When Mel Brooks named the governor in Blazing Saddles after himself, it wasn't just a funny joke. It was actually a tribute to a legendary performer known for using his body and physical comedy to make people laugh. This performer had once ruled the famous Moulin Rouge. Brooks respected this kind of wild, over-the-top comedy and decided to honor it through his film. But Brooks didn't stop with just one tribute. In the same movie, he also played a Native American chief. What made the scene even more surprising was that the chief spoke fluent Yiddish, a language spoken by many Jewish people. In one of the movie's wildest and most unexpected moments, this chief sees a wagon full of black settlers and lets them pass safely. Then, he says something in Yiddish that turns every old Western movie idea upside down. He says something that roughly means, "Don't be crazy, let them go as long as you're healthy," and then adds, "They're darker than us." It was a layered joke, full of history and cultural reference. To some people, it was confusing. To others, it was offensive. But Brooks did it on purpose. In the early days of Hollywood, Native American roles were often played by Jewish actors. Brooks flipped that idea by having a Jewish man play a native chief who spoke Yiddish, adding a complex and hilarious twist only some viewers would understand. It was the kind of joke that worked on multiple levels, funny, strange, and deeply clever all at once. Brooks didn't just act in the film, he added his voice in places that most people wouldn't expect. For example, the singers backing up the character Lily von Stupp during her musical number. That was Brooks. The random voice yelling during the chaotic final fight scene. Also Brooks. He filled the movie's soundtrack with small versions of himself. It was like he hid little pieces of his comedy all over the film. Every part of the movie was made to be funny, even in the smallest sounds. If something broke the normal rules of storytelling, Brooks didn't fix it, he made it even more ridiculous. That was part of his style. One of the clearest examples of this strange and rule-breaking approach is the way the movie used anachronisms. Anachronisms are things that appear in a story but don't belong in the time period. For example, Blazing Saddles is set in the Old West, a time before cars, before jazz, and certainly before television. But suddenly, right in the middle of the film, the Count Basie Orchestra appears in full tuxedos playing April in Paris, a jazz song from the 1930s. A cowboy mentions a TV sports show that didn't exist yet. And then, the final fight in the movie goes completely off the rails. It breaks through the Western set, crashes into a Hollywood soundstage, then into a musical performance, and finally ends up in a cafeteria. None of this was a mistake. Brooks wanted the audience to know this wasn't a serious Western. It was a comedy wearing the costume of a Western. He broke the rules of time, space, and genre because he believed comedy could be funnier when it ignored the rules. The audience loved him for that. They didn't care if it made sense, they just wanted to laugh. About 20 minutes into the movie, one of the most unexpected scenes happens. In the middle of a dusty desert in 1874, the Count Basie Orchestra shows up, dressed like they're about to perform in a concert hall. They're playing April in Paris like they're in a fancy ballroom, not in the Wild West. This moment is confusing and hilarious all at once. Jazz music didn't even exist in 1874. In fact, even ragtime music, which came before jazz, wasn't around for another 20 years. But there they were, performing as if it was completely normal. This was not an accident. Brooks wanted the audience to be surprised, to laugh at the absurdity, and to understand that he wasn't trying to be historically accurate. He wanted to shake things up. The jazz scene wasn't short either, it went on for a while, completely stopping the story. But instead of ruining the film's rhythm, it made it even better. This scene became one of the most iconic in the entire movie. It showed that Brooks loved humor that was strange, clever, and unexpected. The version of April in Paris used in the film wasn't just any old recording. It was the legendary 1955 arrangement by Count Basie himself. This version was famous for its bold brass instruments, smooth swing style, and Basie's unique piano playing. He had recorded it in 1955, and it became a key part of his live shows. One of his most famous performances of that song was at the 1956 Newport Jazz Festival, a big moment in jazz history. By using this exact version in the movie, Brooks added another layer of meaning. He wasn't just throwing in some music, he was honoring real jazz history in the middle of a wild comedy. What made the scene even stranger was that Count Basie didn't play a fictional character. He played himself. A real, world-famous jazz musician appeared in a fake Western set in the 1800s. That choice made the whole thing feel even more surreal and clever. Basie didn't act confused or surprised. He acted like he belonged there, as if performing in the desert in 1874 made perfect sense. That made the comedy hit even harder. It's very rare to see a major musician appear in a movie scene like that without trying to steal the spotlight. But Basie just played along, cool and calm, and it worked beautifully. By putting a black jazz orchestra in the middle of a white, old-fashioned Western, Brooks was making a statement. He was pushing against the way culture is usually presented. He showed that culture doesn't always follow the rules. It overlaps, evolves, and sometimes crashes into itself in funny and surprising ways. Some scholars believe this moment in the movie was a powerful reminder that American culture is made up of many parts, not just one story, one group, or one history. There was another secret hidden in the movie that many people missed. Anne Bancroft, Mel Brooks's wife, was actually in the film. Bancroft was no ordinary actress, she had won the Oscar, the Emmy, and the Tony, one of the very few people in the world to win all three. But instead of asking for a big role or attention, she quietly appeared as an extra in the church scene. She didn't get a close-up. She didn't get a credit. She just blended in with the crowd. It wasn't meant to be a big moment. It was a quiet way to support her husband's project. This little cameo became a kind of hidden treasure for fans. Even though people tried to update movie websites like IMDb with her appearance, they were rejected. Brooks himself confirmed she was in the scene. Fans submitted screenshots as proof. Still, major movie databases didn't add her name. No official credit. Some people blamed strict rules about uncredited roles. Others thought maybe it was just too small of a part. But for many fans, this only made the mystery more interesting. It also showed something powerful, that even the most famous actors can choose to step back and let the story shine without needing attention. Not all the behind-the-scenes stories were so quiet, though. When Madeline Kahn auditioned for the role of Lily von Stupp, it started with a misunderstanding. Brooks asked to see her legs, and she was shocked. She thought it was one of those situations actresses are taught to avoid where the director wants something inappropriate. She stood her ground and said, "So it's that kind of audition?" Brooks panicked. He quickly explained that he needed to see if she could do a dramatic move straddling a chair, like Marlene Dietrich did in Destry Rides Again. That was all. He just wanted to make sure she could pull off the style of the role. Once she understood, Kahn didn't hesitate. She grabbed a chair, lifted her skirt, and nailed the move right there in the room. That performance won her the part immediately. Her humor, courage, and perfect timing made her the clear choice. But she didn't stop there. Right after doing the move, she looked Brooks in the eye, lifted her skirt again, and said, "No touching." That line wasn't in the script. She made it up on the spot, and it was hilarious. It showed how confident and bold she was, and how much she understood the spirit of the movie. That one moment helped shape her entire character. Brooks later said that after seeing that, he knew no one else could play the role. When Mel Brooks first started working on Blazing Saddles, even he didn't know how far he could take things. That's when Richard Pryor joined the writing team. Pryor wasn't just there to add jokes, he gave the movie its heart and its bravery. Brooks was unsure about using the N-word so many times in the film. He was afraid the audience would walk out or that the studio would shut down the project. Pryor didn't hesitate. He told Brooks that if they were going to make fun of racism, they had to show it honestly. They couldn't hide behind soft language. They had to use the real words and let the audience feel the pain. Pryor said very clearly, "We are writing a story of racial prejudice." That was the truth, and that's what made the film powerful. When Pryor couldn't star in the movie himself, he didn't get upset. Instead, he helped choose the actor who would play the lead. He picked Cleavon Little. Pryor said Little was coal-black and that his presence would scare the town in the movie, and that was the point. The townspeople were supposed to be terrified of a black sheriff. That fear is what made the satire sting. Little's performance was calm, confident, and smooth, which made the whole situation even more ridiculous. Without Pryor, none of that would have happened. There was even more drama behind the scenes. The original actor chosen to play the Waco Kid was Gig Young, an Oscar-winning actor. On his first day of filming, he had to hang upside down for a jail scene. But instead of delivering his lines, he started vomiting and couldn't stop. His years of alcoholism had caught up to him, and he was suffering from withdrawal. Brooks had no choice but to stop production and fire him. Gene Wilder flew in to take the role. Young didn't take it well. He sued Warner Brothers, claiming that firing him was unfair and a breach of his contract. The lawsuit added more stress to an already difficult production. But the saddest part came later. In 1978, Young murdered his wife and then took his own life. His brief and tragic involvement in Blazing Saddles became a dark part of Hollywood's history. Another unexpected problem came from Hedy Lamarr, a famous actress from the golden age of cinema. The villain in Blazing Saddles, played by Harvey Korman, was named Hedy Lamarr, a clear play on her name. She didn't find it funny. In fact, she sued Mel Brooks and Warner Brothers for $10 million, saying they used her name without permission. The film even made a joke about this, with a character saying, "This is 1874, you'll be able to sue her." But Lamarr wasn't laughing. Brooks admired her and didn't want a long legal fight. He told his lawyers to pay her whatever she needed. The exact amount is still unknown. Despite all the problems and controversies, the movie made history. In the year 2000, the American Film Institute released a list of the 100 funniest movies of all time. Blazing Saddles ranked number 6. It beat out many other classics like Airplane, and MASH. Then in 2006, The Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry, where culturally important movies are preserved forever. It joined legendary films like Rocky and Fargo, proving that it wasn't just outrageous, it was meaningful. The film mocked racism, made fun of old westerns, and said things nobody else was saying. And people are still talking about it today. In 2024, HBO Max added a special 3-minute warning before the movie. The warning, narrated by film scholar Jacqueline Stewart, explained that the film used racist slurs and stereotypes, but to mock racism, not support it. Some people appreciated the explanation. Others thought it was unnecessary. Only 2 films on the whole platform had this kind of warning, Blazing Saddles and Gone with the Wind. That says everything about how powerful and controversial it still is. Mel Brooks saw this coming. In a 2017 interview, he said, "Political correctness is the death of comedy." He didn't mean that mean-spirited jokes were okay. He meant that real comedy sometimes has to take risks. It has to go to places that are uncomfortable. That's how it breaks down hate and fear. Brooks believed that laughter could do something no speech or argument could ever do. It could disarm hate and make people think, even while they're laughing. Thanks for watching. Keep it and stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.